Hi, guys, it's Wednesday, and the war against Iran is going so well that U.S. regime media has just dropped the new talking point to all its local subsidiaries. What will it be this time?
A short-term disruption for the long-term gain.
Short-term pain for the long-term gain.
Short-term pain be for long-term gain.
We're going to have some short-term pain with long-term gain.
Short-term pay for a long-term gain.
Some short-term pain, yes.
That was an Israeli spokesperson there. That last guy. Wow. Okay, so even Israeli pundits are coming on to say short-term pain for long-term gain.
Some short-term pain, yes, but we've got some long-term gain. Short-term spike for a long-term gain.
Some short-term pain for American consumers.
We may have to deal with that in the short term.
Short-term and temporary.
Temporary short-term pain.
It's going to suck in the short term.
Yeah, I had this viral tweet that I posted on X where I said the hardest part of a quick 2-week ground operation is the first 20 years. First 20 years is the hardest, y'all. But anyways, yeah, so it's really not going well. In fact, it's just about going as well as we predicted. Over 20 nations are now involved. Oil and global supply chains are impacted. The U.S. military has pretty much run out of interceptors, and Tel Aviv is getting absolutely hammered. And we've lost 4 THAAD batteries potentially, which collectively cost $4 to $6 billion. And the Iranian government is more popular than ever, really, right now, because there's been a nationalist rally around the flag response, just like we said there would be, because like a lot of the discontent was coming from like major population centers like Tehran, and when you bomb them indiscriminately, well, and say you don't actually want a regime change, you want to collapse it, here we are, right? So we're also covering up the amount of U.S. casualties sustained thus far. It's really hard to hide killed in action, but there are a ton of casualties. Per CBS News from an hour ago, a state-run media channel, now controlled by Zionist Barry Weiss, that's CBS for you, quote, an Iranian drone attack in Kuwait that killed U.S. service members. This is from the six killed during the opening days. In the early hours of the war with Iran was more severe than previously known, with dozens suffering injuries that included brain trauma, shrapnel trauma, burns, per sources. More than 30 remained in hospitals with battle injuries. And they got moved to Walter Reed, San Antonio, and Landstuhl in Germany. Of those, about 20 arrived on a C-17 military transport aircraft at Landstuhl in Tuesday with injuries the military designated as urgent, requiring evacuation. So more than 100 medical personnel were sent to assist these 30 casualties. It could actually be more, because this is what's called a cover-up. And there are probably more of these incidents throughout the Gulf. So we're going to cover a lot today. And so we are joined by Alina Xenofontos yet again. And before we get into it, what have you been doing for fun during the wars? Human interest
what I've
question.
been doing for fun during the wars. The human interest question. I don't know what to tell you. To be honest, it's just mostly cope. Just reading,
the situation.
coping, monitoring the situation. I mean, what else can you do? Things are happening at such a crazy rate as well. It's happening in so many different fronts, which obviously we're going to get into as well. And there's so much information that's coming out, but also at the same time, so much information is being concealed. And we're trying to put all these pieces together, and it's just like around the clock constantly. And then in my free time, I'm dealing with this little situation, which has kind of hampered the fun. But other than that, yeah.
I feel like I am trapped because we're in this like line of work to be constantly monitoring the situation. So personally, I kind of have to have fun with it. So I've cultivated a new hobby. Every time good old Whiskey Pete Hegseth posts some insane apocalyptic bluster on social media, I just comment pretty gay in the comments section and watch all the MAGA chuds absolutely melt down. They'll be like, "You have blue hair, don't you? Bet you have a septum ring, you beta cuck. Listen up, soy boy. Is it gay to protect America?" And I'll just be like, "Yeah, pretty much. Pretty gay." And it causes absolute chaos. And when I mobilize the word to psychologically batter the fascists online, I mean it in the South Park way. All right? Because this.
So you're rage baiting.
Because this was posted 5 minutes before we started recording by the Department of War, and it's pretty
Are winning.
We're winning decisively with brutal efficiency, total air dominance, and an unbreakable will to accomplish the president's objectives. We stay locked on the target because here at the Department of War, that's our job. God bless our troops and this mission.
I feel like they called it Operation Epic Fury because the other ones we were doing were like Midnight Hammer, Operation Rough Rider, just really, you know. So call to action, follow Pete Hegseth and the Department of War. Every time they post, light up the comment section with this special sauce. We are fighting an existential information war, and it's your job to physically and psychically exhaust the adversary. All right? So rage beta. And while poor kids are getting traumatic brain injuries from the overpressure from Iranian drones, this article just broke. Where is it? Oh, did I not pull it up? Sorry, guys. 1 second. Anyways, you may have seen the egregious defense spending that's been happening with inside the Pentagon. But yeah, Pete Hegseth blew billions on fruit basket stands, chairs, and crab. The Defense Department went on a $93 billion spending spree in 2025 because the basic logic is if you don't use it, you lose it. So, you know, they spent a lot of stuff on, new iPads, $5 million for Apple devices. He bought a $100,000 Steinway and Sons grand piano for an Air Force Chief of Staff's home, including $2 million for Alaskan king crab and another $6.9 million worth of lobster tail. Lobster tail is apparently a favorite of Pete Hegseth's Pentagon. And then, yeah, also like what, 15 million for ribeye steak? Yeah,
I just
sorry,
want to
go
say,
ahead.
I just want to say, this is like the modern version of let them eat cake. I'm
Yeah, I
sorry, but like
know.
that's just how it comes across.
Well, because weeks later, at the start of 2026, millions of Americans lost their SNAP benefits amid the longest government
Yep.
shutdown in U.S. history. And we're going to keep losing food assistance programs, and they want to they can't spend all this money. Yet the administration wants to give another 0.5 trillion dollars to an already trillion-dollar budget. And the problem is not that they can't pass it because everyone's a war hawk, but it's just they don't know how to spend it at this point. So they're having to do lobster tails and ribeye steak for the command echelon. This is everything that the United States propaganda criticized of like the Soviet command echelon and the Soviet military eating caviar while people like died in the trenches. So like every accusation is now like a confession or whatever. It's, oh my God.
You know what's coming to me now? You had sent me, I think yesterday. I don't know if you were going to put it up today, though. So I don't know if you have it saved. The video. It was like a U.S. kind of military official who was stating, the war entrepreneurs, no, military entrepreneurial. What was it that he said? We have great,
Oh, yes, yes,
it was.
yes.
I think it was a really telling piece.
Here,
I don't know
let
if you
me.
have it saved.
Yes. So the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he basically said he was asked the question about like if we're winning the war. He said they're adapting. We have very entrepreneurial war fighters out there. I'd rather not, for operational security reasons, tell them what's working. So I'm not going to answer any questions based on that. But we are watching what they're doing and we are adapting faster than they are. So we have very entrepreneurial war fighters, says the head of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs at a Pentagon press briefing. Also very telling.
Exactly. I mean, that's what I was going to say. The entire, I guess, theme here is, war benefits the bourgeois ruling classes in the United States in one form or another. In the meantime, the working class in the U.S., much like in the working class globally at this point, especially with the skyrocketing oil prices and energy prices overall, it's the working class that are taking the massive hit, including the United States, and they're having a field day, and then simultaneously uploading videos like the one that you just, I guess, initiated this podcast with, which I hadn't seen until you put it up with Pete Hegseth. I mean, it looks like a bro channel going wild. That's essentially what it is, in order to just, camouflage the real losses to the people, the impact that it's having on the material conditions of the average person, by stating, oh well, we're winning, and sort of feeding into this very superficial patriotism and great American military might that comes along with it, in order to, I guess, throw dust in the eyes of the masses. And I mean, I'm not in the US. I don't know to what extent that's working, but judging by the polls that I'm seeing coming out of the United States, most people aren't really buying. I mean, unless you're like a real hardcore MAGA supporter, and
Or
belong
an
somewhere in the
even
evangelical camp that we spoke
yeah.
about last time.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, because like the poorer you get, the closer you'll be to the front of Jesus's army at the last battle of Megiddo. So this is absolutely insane. We are now become an ineffective bourgeois fighting force with a bunch of like uneducated poor kids, and then like a ruling elite who's both ideologically zealous for religious purposes and just obviously subservient to capitalist interests. And they're reaping the benefits of it, and they're having to spend $8 million on crab legs or in lobster tail. And it's the most bro thing too, because like when you deploy, I think you've seen the meme. Every time U.S. forces deploy to a combat zone, they get lobster and steak and lobster. That's what you get. And so they're just having steak and lobster all the time because like they believe they're in this existential war. I don't know. It's so weird to unpack, and we can't do it because that's not the scope of this episode. But we just wanted to point out that these people don't care about you. They don't care about you if you serve, and they certainly don't care about you if you are, about to be homeless. So, bottom line is that all wars are transnational wars or all imperial wars, rather, are transnational wars on the working class, of which you are a part. Now, speaking about how the war itself is actually going, and this is the main thrust of this episode, I just wanted to flag for your attention and read out Senator Chris Murphy's like uber viral tweet last night when he got out of a classified Senate briefing. And it basically confirms everything we've literally been saying for the past 3 years. So first of all, he says, Chris Murphy, last night, I was in a 2-hour briefing today on the Iran war. All the briefings are closed because Trump can't defend the war in public. I obviously can't disclose classified info, but you deserve to know how incoherent and incomplete these war plans are. Maybe the lead is that the war goals do not involve destroying Iran's nuclear weapons program. This is surprising since Trump says over and over that this is a key goal. But then, of course, we already know airstrikes can't wipe out their nuclear material. Second, they confirmed regime change is also not on the list. So they're going to spend hundreds of billions of taxpayer dollars, get a whole bunch of Americans killed, and a hardline regime, probably more anti-American hardline regime, will still be in charge. Okay, so what are the goals? It seems primarily destroying lots of missiles and boats and drone factories. But the question that stumped them, what happens when you stop bombing and they restart production? They hinted at more bombing, which is, of course, endless war. And 5, on the Strait of Hormuz, they had no plan. I can't go into more detail about how Iran gums up the strait, but suffice it to say, right now they don't know how to get it safely back open, which is unforgivable because this part of the disaster was 100% foreseeable. Incorrect, Senator. Every aspect of this disaster was completely foreseeable, and we've been talking about it for years.
Yeah, so what that says to me, it actually reaffirms everything that I've been stating since pretty much last year. I think following actually the 12-day war, and for me, I think I've regurgitated the same point and referenced the same article about 100 times up until this point, but it still stands today, and I think these points actually verify that article in itself. And that is that what we're going to see inside of Iran is what we said, mowing the lawn. It's pretty much the same Israeli doctrine that has been used inside of Gaza, where they're going to systematically continue to attack Iran every few months, every couple of years. And the idea is to essentially economically cripple the country. And this is exactly what they're talking about there. The idea is, go after infrastructure. This is why we're seeing, this is why we're seeing the destruction, not just of military bases and assets, but we're seeing them go after civilian infrastructure, hospitals, schools. They targeted an was it an oil infrastructure? I don't think it was it an oil refinery, which has obviously released so many toxic fumes. But the toxic fumes, this is going to have a long long-lasting impact on the people of Iran. This also therefore increases the cost, the health costs for, for a population of 10 million people who are in that periphery area. And I mean, just for reference, I mean, when you look at the Iraq-Iran war, throughout the 80s, when Iraq had actually used chemical weapons against the Iranian people, the long-term repercussions still stand today, with around 6 million Iranians still needing specialized bandages just to be able, which are related to the chemical attacks that happened, over 30 years ago. And this is a strain again on the economy of Iran. So this is the other angle behind it. So you're hitting vital infrastructure. Today they're actually hit, the central bank in, or try to target banks inside of Iran. All of these aspects are meant to make life in Iran unbearable for the Iranian population. When combined with the sanctions warfare, the sanctions regime that it reached, a very climatic point with the snapback mechanisms that were reimposed in October. And I cannot stress enough, I've actually written about this for those people that are more interested to get into the nitty gritty of it, and spoken about this as well. I cannot stress enough how disastrous those economic sanctions are on a state. How is Iran now supposed to rebuild itself after this new stage of the war if eventually comes to an end? How is it supposed to do that when it's essentially being cut off from the world economy? It's been cut off of SWIFT, and it's become all the more difficult in order to continue its, I guess, more black market trading, that it was able to sustain itself up until this point. And I think something that often gets forgotten is that the 2011 to 2015 Obama era sanctions, which were like this transatlantic allegiance between the EU and Obama, were the worst sanctions in the history of the sanctions regime against Iran. And that's why it had reached a point that was so severe. And beyond the fact that you had the 2006 sanctions that were imposed by the United Nations Security Council, but the new sanctions from 2000 to 2015 had depleted the economy to such an extent that effectively, that's why Iran had even accepted the nuclear deal to begin with, because they were economically coerced. This was like economic duress. They're now back in the same situation as they were back in 2014, 2015, except this time they've still got to recover from the 40 billion losses and damages from the 12-day war, including and not limited to the other minor operations between Israel and Iran over the last couple of years. And now this brutal imperialist war in Iran that is targeting all its key infrastructure. And again, like I said, making it more difficult for the government to be able to rebuild, meet the demands of its people, and make the material conditions of the Iranians so difficult that they will turn either against their state or essentially destroy and hollow out the economy so much that the state itself will, they believe, capitulate to the demands of the United States. And that's why, based on the tweets that you've just, kind of gone over, there isn't a plan for necessarily regime change, because the plan has always been, because they understand that these institutional frameworks of the IRGC and the Iranian Revolution, it's in so many different layers. You can't just get rid of it. You need to find someone from within. This is exactly what Marco Rubio said on the 28th of January, and in his sort of declarative speech to Congress, and that hasn't changed since. And we're seeing that. So I think it's very telling. Economic destruction, make life unlivable for the Iranian civilian population. This war is not just only illegal, but the collective punishment and the toll, the crimes against humanity that are taking place are immense. And the idea is long-term destruction for Iran. And this also serves other purposes, which we'll get into in a little bit. So this is the idea: gradual destruction, making it impossible for them to evolve and develop. By the way, last point, just want to say, I'm also lagging. So if I either interrupt or don't hear you, it's because of that. Just wanted to say that.
It's going pretty well so far. So, one last point is destroying the hospitals and creating ecological disasters. Basically, I consider this a chemical attack. It's very spiritually Israeli, because, they'll take these Palestinians, not charge them, maim them in custody, and just release them specifically so they can just be a burden on their families and do that for the entire society. So we're kind of seeing that, but also everything is very terroristic. So right before we started recording, obviously we knew this was the case, but the Intercept just released an article. You don't have time to pull it up, but Pentagon report: U.S. military fired missile at elementary school. Okay, so can we put away with the fact that this was IRGC propaganda? The Pentagon just released a report saying that it was a targeting error. But guess what, guys? Was it the attack which came after a year long effort by Secretary of War Pete Hegseth to, quote, gut programs to reduce civilian casualties, killed more civilians than any other strike in Trump's second war? It was called colossal negligence, but I think it was pretty engineered because he's been doing an entire campaign to get rid of the civilian harm mitigation mechanisms at the Pentagon. So, like the Civilian Protection Center of Excellence, usually creates targeting parameters for like how you integrate it into the intelligence and strike cycle. They're getting rid of all of these protections. So this is kind of like, in some ways, as we warned about, this is the Israelification of how like the West will now wage war imperially on a global scale. No civilians, no such thing as civilian targets. Collateral damage is whatever. We're just going to do it. DAIA doctrine for the entire world.
The thing is, though, the only thing I would disagree with, I actually would say this has been a long-standing military, I guess. I wouldn't say doctrine because it wouldn't be, but we've seen this sort of activity before, and specifically during the Cambodia war, where they dropped something like, I think it was like 2.7 was a million tons of like what's the word now? Anyway, chemical. I think it was herbicides that were dropped basically.
Agent
Yeah,
Orange.
and among other things. So basically, yeah, that's what it was, Agent Orange, and they had basically, it was meant to destroy all the local agriculture. It was essentially poisonous. It was poisoning the local population. And it still has lasting impacts until today. So we've seen these types of operations by generally imperial powers that are trying to obviously, subjugate a population and to achieve their own goals. I wouldn't even necessarily say it's something new. I just think that what we're seeing now is more of an is a continuation and a return to
Yeah, because during the global war on terror, we were quote fighting a counterinsurgency, and we are trying to win hearts and minds. So it was actually military doctrine to protect these sites because you didn't want a failed or collapsed state, because we were doing a nation building exercise, which is where they take all your tax money and give it to private contractors to prop up a government that nobody wants. But you still protect these sites, right? It's called SWEAT MSO: sewage, water, electricity, academics, trash, medical safety, and others. That's completely gone. The doctrine of the global war on terror is now returning to like barbaric Vietnam style air campaigns.
Yeah, because that's exactly what we're seeing, and this is why, when we're having a conversation about what's happening in Iran, I think sometimes people overly focus only on Iran's military capacity, and I said this in our previous episode. The long-term repercussions of the current, joint U.S. Israeli aggression, imperialist aggression on Iran is fundamentally the destruction to the infrastructure, to the hospitals, to the economy. The long-term repercussion of what is, as you accurately stated, chemical attacks against the civilian population, in combination with the economic warfare that Iran has been subjugated to for over 47 years. I mean, Iran has essentially set the stage, or actually the policy against Iran, the sanctions against Iran are what set the stage for sanctions warfare globally. There's a great paper published by the Brookings Institute, how Iran shaped global sanctions war, because it became a prototype. And so this is the kind of implications that it has for Iran, who's trying to obviously build a resistant and resilient economy and military structure to push back against imperialism. But it's doing so whilst being surrounded by, I guess, I would say hostile actors, and simultaneously it's been cut off the global economic I guess chain, and now a lot of its infrastructure has been targeted that even after the war they're going to have to rebuild it, and this is going to actually strain the angst that the people are feeling. But to go to the other argument that you said, we are seeing a lot of Iranians that are coming to the street that even during the protest, they were obviously outspoken against the current, I guess, establishment. They are now aligning with the current establishment. And I've said this before: if Iran was left to its own devices, the chances are that Iran would evolve out of a theocracy. It would have evolved if there was no sanctions warfare, no imperialist warfare. They would have been allowed to evolve organically in their own means and way. We're talking about a very highly educated population, and Iran has its own internal contradictions that would have aided in that evolution. Like one classic example I always like to give, just like a little quick one, is the women's movement, for example. I mean, the fact, because it's a theocracy, they needed women as doctors, teachers, etc., because obviously of the more religious conservative nature of the theocracy. But in doing so, you've created a massive educated female population. Over time, that was going to push back against the more, I guess, conservative aspects of the society. However, the very existence of the sanctions war, the imperialist aggression against Iran, actually destroys the material conditions by which to actually, which allows the working class to actually achieve, any sort of reform or change within their own government, within their own country. But also it creates class alliances. So and what I mean by I guess the internal bourgeois class of Iran and its working class. So where there was protests, where there was genuine frustration to things that could, I guess, be handled a bit better as well, within Iran, that alliance that antagonism gets destroyed essentially, because now an alliance gets created, and this actually prevents Iran from evolving. Obviously, this is obviously outside the scope of this conversation, but because you had mentioned earlier, if anything, it's actually bringing together the Iranian people. And yes, it's actually legitimizing the voice of the hardliners, what the West called hardliners in Iran, which is actually most likely not going to bring about not only regime change, but Iran will not capitulate, and will most likely have a more militant approach towards even, towards the United States, as well as maybe even internally.
Yeah. So first of all, I think NATO is scrambling your internet connection because you are the blurriest I've ever seen you coming to us from the island of Cyprus.
Oh, oh, okay.
But it's
Sorry.
okay.
I see. I told you that's why I was lagging as well. Let me see what I could do.
Oh yeah, are you on a VPN? But anyways, I'll talk this next bit if you want to try to figure that out. Even though most of our audience are audio listeners, but look, you talked about this going on forever. First, for Iran hawks in Israel and the U.S., the longer the war, the better. Honestly, trapping Trump, I think, in some sort of quagmire situation raises the odds in their estimation of state collapse in Iran. A humanitarian catastrophe, which they're trying to engineer, and the ideal outcome for like Netanyahu and the Lindsey Grahams and everybody. But like Trump has plenty of troops at his disposal as well. Even if he hasn't put in the months it would take to assemble an Iraq scale invasion force, we have about 10,000 rapid response troops that can deploy anywhere in a number of days, potentially to buy time for a larger invasion force. And third, the closer U.S. forces actually get to Iranian soil, that's why they pulled them away from the bases in the Gulf, the more U.S. technological and firepower advantages are completely negated. We can bomb Iran at will in a barbaric air campaign, but that doesn't protect, people inside the country from stepping on an IED, or like extortion 1-7 in Afghanistan happening again, where some dude is in the bushes with an RPG taking out a helicopter. So there are 3 proposed ground operations that have been reported. First is a commando raid on nuclear sites to secure Iran's uranium. As Trump pitched, this would be Delta Force, would infiltrate the facilities, and destroy the centrifuges themselves with controlled detonations. Obviously, that's not going to work. It's too stupid to even talk about. They'd be surrounded by, a bunch of military units, and they don't even know where it's stored. So, yeah, it would be like a multi-day battle with special operations forces and close air support. Stupid, not going to happen. Second is to seize Karg Island to hold Iran's oil exports hostage. So, it's Iran's oil lifeline. About 90% of Iran's oil exports go through Karg Island. They would hope to collapse Tehran's economy, and it would also not be able to pay its troops anymore. Of course, the island's like 5 miles long, I think. Dropping like the 82nd Airborne is a death trap. Uh, it's also hardened. There's a lot of military forces there. It's also a hostage crisis waiting to happen. Uh, Look, guys, and there's also like sea mines and ambush with drone boats and like launch shore-based anti-ship cruise missiles from three directions all at once thanks to the shape of Iran's coastline. The strategic logic is off. uh they expect an attack here. It would be an absolute bloodbath if you put boots on the grounds on Karg Island, and if you just carpet bomb the whole thing too. So look, and then the third is to occupy Iran's coast to reopen oil shipping lane, which is a mass marine expeditionary force landing. All of this is stupid. All it's in it's not a bug. It's like the entire strategic logic just makes absolutely no sense, and there's really no way to for them to like back down either. So what are we even looking at? Just we're looking at like a more long-term quagmire. How does Trump pull a Bush 2008 mission accomplished spectacle at this point? Because Iran now has no interest, because in a lot of strategically they have the upper hand. Why would they come to the negotiating table now? They need to make sure that something like this never ever happens again, even if, to quote our own media, short term pain for long term gain.
Yeah, so it's rather ironic. I remember when we had actually had an episode with Danny. By the way, I hope you could see me a little better now.
No, it's okay.
I don't know
We're,
what
we're
the
just we're
internet
just
connect.
gonna list. We're just gonna look at you with our
Okay.
ears.
Okay, sorry guys. I don't know. It says that the internet's okay, but yeah, I don't know what's going on there. Yeah, so what I was going to say, I'd actually said on an episode we had a few weeks ago with Danny, and what I had actually said was they're going to try to phrase this that before the war even started. They're going to try and phrase this as short-term losses, long-term gains. I actually had said this is how they're going to try to sell it to the public. And interestingly, I mean, of course, right on cue, that's exactly what happens. Now, with regards to obviously the military activity, I actually think, based on a lot of the like the articles that I've been reading and trying to sort of keep up to date with everything, is that I think that they're going to try to go for the obviously what's it called, Kurg Island, where obviously the 90% of Iran's oil production is essentially located. It's one of the most fundamental structures to the Iranian economy. And the reason I say that as well is because of the kind of buildup that we're also seeing in the Eastern Mediterranean. This is kind of what I told you, obviously, in our private conversations. And I think, obviously, we discussed that earlier. Because the situation right now in the Eastern Mediterranean is that on the pretext of the so-called drone strike on the British bases here, which then has turned out officially, even by the UK, I guess, official statements, is that it wasn't by Iran. Iran itself has come out and said that all the drone strikes against Azerbaijan, Cyprus, and Turkey were false flag operations, that Iran has not conducted any such operation against these three territories. And to be honest, there's still this massive, I guess, fog concerning what exactly is happening with the bases. Every few hours, apparently, there's some sort of scare on the bases. And as somebody who's located here, I have not seen or heard anything, and I'm not too far from the bases, so I don't really understand what exactly is happening. And yet somehow all these European states and the EU has basically triggered the defense clause, which is, I think Article 42(7) of the EU treaty, in order to say we're going to protect Cyprus, which, by the way, the UK bases are not Cyprus or Republic of Cyprus. The UK itself is no longer part of the EU, but they're using the fact that Cyprus is in the EU to defend against attacks on British colonial bases, because that's essentially what they are. And the buildup that's happening has been labeled by a lot of these mainstream media outlets here in Europe as the European Armada. And Macron is currently in Cyprus, and he's going to be here for 2 to 3 days, discussing with the president of Cyprus and the prime minister of Greece with regards to, I guess, their own security interests and operations within not just the Eastern Mediterranean, but through the Red Sea all the way to Strait of Hormuz. Because as it currently stands, we have one nuclear powered aircraft carrier that itself has an entire sort of carrier team that comes with it, submarines. We've got Macron also had actually just officially yesterday also stated that we're looking at another 12 warships from France. So in addition to the a nuclear powered aircraft carrier, another 12 warships just from France, and including, in addition to that, we have 6 to 7 other warships from the Netherlands, Spain, Germany. We've got now 10 F-16s because Turkey's also joining in, stating that obviously they need to provide protection to the what's internationally recognized as the occupied territory in the north of Cyprus as well. So they're sending 6 F-16s plus the Greek F-16s. And so what we have and what's understood now within the Eastern Mediterranean is this multi-layered air defense system that's been established, but also these radar systems, air defense systems, and all this operation activity, like all this operational sort of capacity to not just defend, but also be able to use, according to Macron, if it means defending the interests of Europe. This is no longer about protecting Cyprus. This was never about protecting Cyprus. This has always been excessive. It was merely the excuse, which is why I do believe it was a false flag operation. This is about going into the Strait of Hormuz, because he said of the 12 warships that are going to be coming here, including the aircraft carrier, that they're going to basically be waiting for a time when the war has eased out a little bit, not an end of the war, to basically enter the Strait of Hormuz and protect the interests of the EU. In response to that, Iran has said that is out of the question. So what we're looking at, in my opinion, is that they're creating a ground force, a hub, an intelligence communication hub in it, which would make sense as well, because there has been confirmed damages to the a communication infrastructure that the United States has within the Gulf. Cyprus is becoming, not Cyprus, just generally the Eastern Mediterranean, a backup hub for intelligence, for a communication, as a communication hub and a command and control hub for the EU, in combination with the US and Israel, to not only monitor the Eastern Mediterranean, but I personally believe to try to enter the Strait of Hormuz and possibly, and this is just speculation, I think they're going to go for the island, and because they're looking at it as leverage. They need the leverage because militarily, they're they're not winning, and they're running out of air defense systems, and even
They're pretty
Tomahawk
much
missiles,
out.
and now they had to actually move from using. Yeah, I mean they are. That's why there's the whole sanctions now against Raytheon, and who is it? Raytheon that produces the THAAD missiles, interceptors. I can't remember. Basically saying no stock buybacks. You have to invest in. Trump actually wants production from 96 to 400 just this year, and again that wouldn't even be enough anyway. They've gone through more than that in just the first few days of the war with Iran. So I'm of the opinion that because they're militarily, the US and Israel are militarily struggling at the moment, that is why they're bringing in the reinforcements. The EU, many of which these states, I mean, all of them are part of NATO, Turkey included. They're using Cyprus's status as both a country in West Asia and in the EU, the defense clause within the EU treaty, to then bring and set up in the region and aid the US and Israel in the Strait of Hormuz. That is my I guess
Yeah,
speculation.
I could see them using Cyprus as a staging area. They did something similar during Operation Prosperity Guardian, against the Houthis. But the problem is, like, even if they flood the zone with these ships, as we saw with the war in Ukraine, all of these waterborne drones can actually take out capital ships. Like Russia lost a frigate to a loitering amphibious drone, like a frigate. And so basically what Iran has done is deployed, what I've heard from some folks more plugged into actual intelligence stuff, is they've deployed all of these like solar powered loitering amphibious drones all throughout the waters, and there's not really a good plan to how to deal with them or to make sure they're all accounted for or to target them, because like they're pretty much on their own power, just getting sunlight and then at night being able to like deploy and stuff like that. So it's actually when Senator Chris Murphy says that, I can't talk about how Iran can really gum up the works. It's a lot of these loitering drones that we don't know how to identify or deal with. You know, like there's an Aegis defense system which can intercept ballistic missiles. I know the Iranians tried to target a couple ships, but didn't really work out. This is completely different, and that's just one of the problems faced from a tactical perspective that the U.S. and these allied NATO countries are kind of facing because ships we've kind of entered this new era of democratized warfare where these big powerful naval vessels are actually very vulnerable to low cost easily manufacturable drones and unmanned aerial vehicles. So yeah, that's a huge problem, and I think they're just staging, and they really don't know what exactly they're going to do. They're taking leadership and cues from the United States, but the United States doesn't know what it wants to do. There's no plan coming from the Pentagon or the White House beyond just keeping this thing going. And again, Iran says, we're not really interested in negotiations right now. So they're going to cause as much pain for the United States average citizen and for the government and the military as they can so this never happens again.
Yeah. So I think the way I would like to conclude on this is just I have several points, like in the sense of like what I think their aims are, right? So the first one is what I said earlier. Obviously, try to inflict as much damage on Iran as possible in order to take them back years. This is the thing. If you can get a country to capitulate, and this is the other aspect to it, right?
Bomb them in
They're
the Stone
hoping
Age.
we can't bring about regime change. Yeah, exactly. If you can get the country to capitulate, which, as we said earlier, due to the fact we're seeing this class alliance that's taking place between, I guess, the bourgeois class in Iran and its working class, and we're seeing this unified front that's taking place right now. If you can actually break the regime, and you hardliners get put in its place, what are you going to do? You rain so much destruction on Iran that yes, you send it back to the Stone Age, and this as well does serve certain strategic interests for the United States. And everything has to do with the war, the greater imperialist war with China, and
Boom.
which is the greatest rival to U.S. American empire. I guess is putting it very simply, because I often have to remind people, like I said before, Iran is a central node in the infrastructure, in the BRICS infrastructure in the BRI. Now, a lot of analysts, a lot of individuals will turn around and argue that no, the entire purpose of the BRI, the way it was established by China, was to have different sort of diverging, key trade corridors so as to not be limited to one. And this sort of goes back to why one of the aspects, because there's a plethora of reasons why the BRI was initiated by China, but one of the aspects as well is to make it less reliant on the Strait of Malacca, close to Malaysia, which is like the most important, probably, choke point for international trade, and where a lot of China's, I think around 80% of China's oil gets traded through that particular region, as well as about 60% of its gas, among other obviously trade related, China's trade. Sorry. So the whole idea, yeah, I lost my train of thought there. So the entire point is to obviously become less reliant on that. Was one of the main reasons of the BRI. Now, the other avenues for the other corridors that have been established for the BRI is what you've got: the Pakistan-China economic corridor.
Mm-hmm.
What's happening right now on the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan? You've got
It's
obviously the BLA.
It's not a stable situation.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
It's not a stable situation. I mean, there's been systematic terrorist attacks, not just now, but for years against, especially Chinese nationals. There's been the BLA movement that originally, once upon a time, was a Marxist-Leninist organization. Hasn't been the case for a good many decades since. But, they have a direct anti-BRI, anti-China rhetoric, and they're constantly targeting the BRI, making it an unstable, economic corridor. And then you also have, obviously, the escalation now, the open war between Afghanistan, obviously, and Pakistan. And again, these are sort of the remnants as well of the imperialist, interferences within the regions, because a lot of these groups are sort of created in reaction to or in combination or as a consequence of U.S. involvement within these particular regions. So that's obviously taking place. Another angle, another sort of node in the architecture of the BRI is the Arctic route via Russia, but this is at the earlier stages. And then you obviously have the Central Asian territories, which are still, in the early, are not as evolved and developed, and geographically are not as important as Iran. Iran connects China to the rest of West Asia, Africa, Europe, and East Asia. It's so important strategically in terms of like its trade, but also for the digital Silk Road, which is also part and parcel of the Belt and Road Initiative, and it's actually a huge chunk. It actually represents a huge chunk of the 400 billion, the 25-year long 400 billion deal between China and Iran. So, Iran is very central to all of this. And now all of a sudden, if you're raining hell down on Iran and destroying its infrastructure, you're essentially setting back China's plans for Iran. You're setting back the BRI and all these projects that are basically require not only just a sense of stability for Iran, but also a degree of economic growth, which that's what the United States is trying to obviously deprive not just Iran of, but obviously of the BRI, China, and the general multipolar world, because this is a war on the genesis of a new
So,
world.
I follow a lot of, I guess more like anti-Israel accounts on like the Christian conservative
Hmm.
stuff, and it's kind of super annoying right now because they're framing this as like a holy war against the synagogue of Satan. But I'd like to remind everybody that Israel has always been happy to be the fall guy for the atrocities of U.S. imperialism. Okay, from Guatemala to Sri Lanka, Gaza, Iran. They got you gearing up for a religious war instead of the global class war, and all these secular transnational billionaires are kind of like laughing their way to the bank, and the movers of like overseas financialized capital. And the best way to conceptualize, because we've done so many episodes on this, but I think could kind of make a little bit more sense. What's going on is there are two different chessboards. Okay, there's a regional chessboard that Israel, Iran, Saudi, Qatar, Turkey play on, and then there's a more like global one between the two powers, the US and China, and they're both taking place at the same time in two different strategic environments. And Israel and US interests overlap perfectly for the moment because both games need Iran to be gone. For Israel, it must go so it can reshape and expand in the region. After Iran falls, they're gonna like try to go for Turkey or Pakistan, if I don't think it will, but yeah. And for us, it must fall to isolate China. Again, as you mentioned, the Gulf of Malacca, destabilizing Central Asia would also be helpful with that, and using our military presence in Taiwan, Okinawa, and South Korea to just really box everybody in. So it's Iran's China's most important ally in the region. So it's, but I don't think
I
like
was also
China's
going
going
to
to get involved in more. Oh yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, 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 sorry. Because I'm lagging, I thought you finished your sentence, so please proceed.
No, it's just I think it's just helpful for like people who are new to this to try to conceptualize it in two different like strata, right? Like when it comes to military planning, there are different levels of conceptualization because you can't hold all of it in because you're a human being in your head at the same time. So, like, if you're involved in ground operations, you're just really you're only focused on two levels at a time. So there's tactical, operational, strategic, and global. So, like, whatever level that you're on, and if you're a planner, you might be on like operational. You only deal with like the tactical stuff and you don't really touch the strategic stuff because it's just too much to do. But if you're a general at the Pentagon, you're probably going to be doing like only strategic level thinking and operational level thinking. So like I would say like maybe that's also a way to conceptualize it. Like there is this regional chessboard, and we have spent the first half of this episode talking about kind of that. We haven't talked about the Gulf states yet, but that's kind of isolated. And then you need to like talk about the other bigger chessboard that only two powers in the world really can play. Russia, it's not really on that one, I wouldn't say, but US and China is the big overarching chessboard that you need to look at this. And so that's why the Zionist occupied government thing really doesn't work, because they're not really. I've seen arguments that, US unipolar power would benefit Israel. I was like, yeah, I guess, but this would be happening if Israel didn't even exist. We were doing this stuff before we were even this entwined with Israel. So it just really doesn't fit from a structural analysis at all. And so this is why I like the two chessboards thing analogy.
No, I agree. And actually, I just want to throw in one word here too, however you want to put it, petrodollar. And that will actually lead us into the
Yes.
conversation about the
There we
Gulf.
go.
Because I mean, no, because I mean, the, okay, when we're talking as well about Iran, so we talked about the BRI, we talked about the significance in terms of, how Iran is a fundamental node to the BRI architecture. The other aspect behind this, obviously, is the financial, I guess, institutions that the BRICS is trying to establish. These alternative financial institutions, sort of a power that will parallel and compete with, the World Bank, with the IMF, with SWIFT, therefore creating a financialized system outside the Western dominance, as a Western dominance and control. And where Iran again fits into this, and how again you can sort of, it can, I guess, create a picture for, I guess, the audience to understand, is that prior, and I actually wrote this, and little parenthesis here, if you guys really want to nerd out on these things, I actually wrote an 11-page a research piece on specifically why Iran is being targeted and why it's to the benefit of the United States. It's on my Patreon for those that really want to get into, like, I've also got like the bibliography, but like, this is the thing. Before January, before the United States was able to take, I guess, the Venezuela under Venezuela's oil under American capital control, which obviously happened with the illegal kidnapping of the president Maduro. Up until that point, Venezuela, Iran, China, and Russia alone constituted around 35 point, I think, 15% of the world's oil reserves. Collectively, that is higher than the entirety of the Gulf states, the entirety of the GCC states, which stand at 29%. This means that these four countries that are adversarial to the United States, and they will also, have not only 35% of the world's oil reserves, but they're functioning and they will continue to function outside the Western financial institutions. And as those financial, I guess, alternatives would continue to grow, so would their ability to trade in oil and resources outside the dollar. Now, this is very important because this would reduce the demand for dollar globally. Because what other countries also part of BRICS? You've got countries like Nigeria, also another oil-rich country that was part of BRICS, who wants to be part of this new parallel sort of, I guess, world, multipolar world. And the demand for the dollar is quintessential to the United States in order to uphold, I guess, it's not only just its dollar dominance, but in order to balance its deficit. This is the thing. So the United States happens to always have a trade deficit, and it requires a huge amount of money coming into the United States through, purchasing bonds, treasuries, and also just general investment in U.S. capital. But to do this, to continue the demand for dollars, you obviously need to have, control over these resources. And this is where the Gulf states come in, and how the Gulf states, led by Saudi Arabia, essentially secured the US dollar as the reserve currency of the world. So right now, Venezuela has not been lost to the United States. And as it currently stands, based on my calculations and estimations, the United States has this effective control or influence over 80% of the world's oil. No, 80%, around 60%, 68% of the world's oil reserves. If Iran was to fall tomorrow, I'm just saying, or decide to open its oil markets to American capital, that would put it well under, above 80%, which means that the United States would be able to secure the dollar as the world's reserve currency, and through that be able to use its financial dominance to declare economic warfare on its adversaries, especially, again, going back to China and Russia. So this is another reason why the war in Iran is so important to the United States. It's about reinstating and securing the petrodollar, because you need something to back it. And this kind of goes back. And before we're going to get into now with the Gulf states, it goes back obviously to the collapse of the Bretton Woods, I guess, the dollar, the golden backed dollar, and how they had, and how then the gold, sorry, the oil, basically, because the petrodollar came in to, I guess, secure the dollar, which at that stage would not have been able to, as I said, maintain its status at the world as the world's reserve currency had it not been for the GCC states. So I'm gonna pass it over to you now, and we could like get into the GCC states because they seem to be getting a free pass on everything.
Yeah, so like, hang on, I'm just pulling up some figures real quick. So, even taking the petrodollar out of it, like the U.S. has pursued like imperialist objectives through these types of like regional strategies with trusted local partners. Like after World War II, helped to rebuild Germany, rebuild like Japan as a center of like Germany as a center of Western European capital accumulation. Created new markets for the U.S. and commodities. It broke open European colonial empire. Look, and the bottom line is these Gulf states are, about like trade and security relations with Israel. They are quintessential to our plan, and the plan is to foster extensive trade, security, and technology relations by funneling vast resources of the oil-rich states into like Israel's advanced technology sectors, our own sectors, like investing massive amounts of in like Saudi and other Gulf states to increase their like tech sectors as a challenge to like China's digital Silk Road. And like we've seen the UAE get like a 1.4 trillion 10-year investment framework and a 2 billion in new commercial deals. Qatar a 1.5 trillion economic commitment. Saudi Arabia 600 billion investment commitment. Like, it's not just about Israel, and these are what we would like call sub-imperial states that are really important to our regional strategy. And before the collapse of the monarchy in Iran, there was something called like a two-pillar strategy with like Iran and Saudi Arabia really helping us dominate the region. And so this is when the monarchy collapsed, it really destabilized the region from the perspective of like Western capital extraction. And so these Gulf states can pretend to be like, oh, we're going to start canceling, our trade agreements or like investment agreements with the United States. No, they're not. No, like they rely on the United States protection and Israeli spyware to keep their populations, some of which are like heavily slave and indentured servitude based societies, in line. Their entire power comes from their relationship with the U.S. empire. I think a couple years ago we were talking about, is Saudi going to flip and kind of play both sides with like BRICS and the U.S. empire? No, they're in it. They're in it with us now. So when they're blustering about how U.S. is not protecting them, it's going to alienate them. Like, come on, dude. Of course, they gave their warnings. They don't like what's going on. Here is the Qatar spokesperson for the foreign ministry speaking yesterday. Let's just listen.
We have warned in Qatar for many years now that escalation left unchecked in the region would lead to catastrophic results. We are at that moment where we are seeing the catastrophic results across the region. Right now, as we speak, you can put a map of the region in front of you, and you will not be able to find a finger-pointing space where escalation is not happening. This is exactly what we have said from day one. This is the biggest I told you so in the history of I told you so's in the world. We have said from day one, left unchecked, the escalation that started in 2023 would lead...
Call it a genocide, bro. Call it a genocide, I dare you.
...to a regional war. What we are seeing right now is a regional war that still can be contained. But the trajectory we are going through right now is a very dangerous trajectory for the region. And we keep warning that, again, this left unchecked and conflict moved from negotiation rooms to battlefields will lead to even more catastrophic results for the people of the region.
Okay, cool, bro. You're telling us everything we already know, and there's no condemnation. They're just like, yeah, we told you this was going to happen, and nobody likes it. Let's stop it, move it to the negotiating table. But, there's going to be no pushback from these sub-imperial states because they rely completely on us. Even if, U.S. bases are seen as like a temporary liability when this war is going on, it's going to end eventually, and they're going to welcome U.S. assets and militaries back in, and they're going to continue to be propped up by us, use Israeli spyware, and host our militaries through status of forces agreements. So all of this is what exactly? It's a big nothing.
Yeah, I was gonna say for me, this is just a massive facade. It's an entire PR stunt, and it kind of goes. You know what? To be honest with you, this is just classic GCC states hiding behind the Israel, I guess, bandwagon, which is it's working very well for the United States and the GCC states because the way that it's been phrased is like, oh, the what was happening within the region, that also places a lot of responsibility, obviously, on Israel, who, because the way that they're using ambiguous language is meant to say, see, we were saying things should calm down. The states that did not calm down and the ones that were escalating and aggravating the tensions, they are to blame for the situation that we are in today. So it's sort of, again, hiding behind the bandwagon of Israel is the scapegoat for everything. And this is why it's so fundamental to break away from this narrative and understand the economic base structure that, I guess is the guiding force behind what is happening, I guess, globally. Now, with regards to what he said, as well, this is the thing. The GCC states don't just depend on the United States. The United States itself also depends on the GCC states. It is a symbiotic relationship. It's very important to the mutual existence of the bourgeoisie inside of the GCC states, but also the United States, its own ruling class, and its own, in order to, as I said, sustain its own imperialist, I guess, dominance around the world. And to bring, again, I kind of want to go back a little bit again to like the collapse of the Bretton Woods, because it's really interesting. When I've actually read, you know how you see all these Instagram reels, etc. There was a video that I saw, and it was basically kind of referencing back to the Arab states embargo of oil that led to the oil crisis in 1973, and saying back when the Arabs had guts, et cetera, et cetera. And they tried to basically say, like, oh, obviously the embargo was directed towards any Western state that was supporting Israel at that time. I would disagree with that because actually what was happening behind the scenes is that the Saudi Arabia, which is basically kind of the lead at that point, we didn't have the GCC yet, right? But they were sort of like, it's the leaders of the now GCC states. They still maintained its trade, in oil with the United States. Oil was still flowing in the United States, albeit more expensive, but it was still flowing through into the United States. So there wasn't really necessarily embargo. It was very well managed and calculated. The oil companies in the United States made billions, I think around something like 10 billions within just collectively within just a couple of months. And obviously, at the same time, you had all these Arab states that were making that themselves were making billions in profits. I mean, I can't exactly remember the numbers now, although I had them noted down, especially for when I had actually written my piece. But it was something along the lines of going from making 30 billion annually to about 102 billion. I mean, this is kind of surplus value that we're talking about that the GCC states were making. And then what happened? Nixon had to pull out of the golden backed dollar in 1971, fundamentally because the United States no longer had enough gold to be able to convert and back all the dollars it was pumping into the world economy in order to preserve its reserve currency status, which would mean that if it continued down that path, they would run out of gold, which is why he had to essentially execute the, abandoning of the golden backed dollar. And then, which was like the whole Nixon shock. And then conveniently, 2 years later, you had the crisis. The American economy and its oil companies made an incredible amount of money. And in addition to that, the bourgeoisie inside of the GCC states, again, now the GCC states, made so much profits, so much, like the billions that they were making, they had nowhere to put the money. The only place was the United States. And that is how the petrodollar was established. And to do so, it was almost an orchestrated plan between the ruling classes in both the United States and the Arab states. They became, multi-billionaires. They went from, I guess, being relatively underdeveloped to these, massive finance hubs. And the United States was able to back its dollar that had now just would have otherwise lost its global reserve status with oil. And so, why I'm saying this now, this is how important that relationship is. The GCC states collectively have about, I think, just Japan and some EU states, they have trillions invested in American capital and treasury bonds. And I think just like last few weeks ago, on the 19th of January, the Saudi Arabia had actually just added another 14.4 billion purchased in treasury bonds, which was like an extra 10% out of nowhere. In addition to all the trillions of dollars in deals that they made, the whole Middle East tour last year with Trump and all the investment in becoming an AI hub in the region, they need the American economy and imperialism to succeed in order to preserve their own wealth. If the American economy tomorrow was to collapse, if the dollar was to collapse, so would their wealth. So everything that the United States is doing inside of Iran is absolutely supported and backed by the Gulf monarchies because their class interests are not just dependent on it, it's infused with it. I mean, you want to talk about a symbiotic relationship with Israel and the United States? Yeah, I think the one between the Arab states and the US is probably even more critical. And yet they hide behind Israel and nobody
Thank
talks about
you.
their complicity.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Yeah.
basically, Israel has now become our scapegoat for everything else that the U.S. empire is complicit in. You know, like Israel's controlling everything, dude.
Mhm.
Pam Bondi, the head of the Department of Justice, used to be a registered foreign lobbyist for Qatar. Like, a lot of our officials used to work for Saudi Aramco. Like, we are so intertwined with these states in ways that people don't even realize. But I guess it's just intellectually easier. I mean, intellectually is a bad word for this too. Just like conceptualize Jews just running the government, and they had their own weird chosen people religion and blah blah blah, and all the while we've got this going on. So it's just super frustrating. So again, regional chessboard, global chessboard. They need the U.S. empire, as you said, to exist, so that they can maintain their wealth. If there's a multipolar world order, if things get a little more too socialist for their country, for their comfort globally, that will affect them as well. So all of their interests, all of our sub-imperial states, whether they be the GCC states, Israel, kind of hard to apply that to Europe in some ways, but even though they're kind of more like a vassal to us, like all of this is bound up in maintaining the status and the hegemony of the U.S. empire, because flipping it over will completely destabilize the status quo and ruling order that it has existed since the unipolar moment and the collapse of the Soviet Union. So, yep, I think all of this is bluster and it's still smoke and mirrors, and the fact that people are still falling for it in 2026 is kind of frustrating, to say the least. Because if they were going to speak out,
Oh yeah.
in sort of pan Arab solidarity and talk about regional stability and not having any more wars, they wouldn't be engaged in massive real estate deals to redevelop the Gaza Strip and turn it into a dystopian smart city cyberpunk plantation where the Gazans are given two choices: to either work as indentured servants or just be completely ethnically cleansed. Like, they are complicit in every dirty deal that we do to enrich themselves. And it's worse than that. Like, all of these sheiks from the Gulf countries are also coming over here with golden visas, buying up massive amounts of property in Miami and San Diego and squeezing us for everything we're worth. And like, y'all want to just blame it all on the Jews. GTFO, dude. It's just so blazingly apparent that it's just a cover it. It's a smokescreen for all of this. And I think people, and the problem with like conservatives that I talk to about this, they're just not ready to, they're just unable to fundamentally envision a world without capitalism. They don't understand that you will have a house, maybe two, you will have a car, you'll have an iPhone, you'll have a computer, like you'll have all this stuff. It just will be under a system that doesn't have Qatari oil sheiks buying up, the house that was meant for your kid. Like what are we even talking about? So I'm like super frustrated right now because we're still 3 years later, we're still having this conversation. But I get it. It's going to take a lot of time, but you guys
I know.
gotta understand the whole structure of how this entire empire is propped up.
I agree. I have the same level of frustrations, because also this kind of diagesis is very much perpetuated as well by certain aspects of the academic circles of people, that are, sort of generally interviewed and high profiled, trusted sources. But this is the problem, that these individuals do believe in the liberal free market. They believe in capitalism. They believe in liberal democracy. They just believe, they're just trying to save it from itself. And then, so this is a battle of the ideologies here, and sort of in the inability to accept that the system that they believe to, or have come to internalize as the better system, the fairer system, is actually not that. And so this is a form of cognitive dissonance. I've said
I
this
know
before,
it's
and
just
it's
like
easier to believe that than to be critical of something that you've,
yeah. No, it's just like when Democrats talk about, like, capitalism's good. It's the best way to allocate capital. Make sure everyone's like prepared and like provided for. It's just that Reagan ruined everything. It's like, yeah, that guy sucked, and Milton
yeah,
Friedman was stupid about the whole trickle down economics, which he later disavowed. But like, come on, dude, it was always going to end up like this. Like, Reagan just accelerated how much it sucked.
Agreed. I agree. This is the sort of the natural, I guess, economic consequences of capitalism. This is why it's so important to understand and study, I guess, the mechanics of it. Because once you do and you're able to apply it in, real life situations, you will see, how its contradictions operate, and the way in which they try to create the counter tendencies to manage it. One of which we've discussed before is war, and destruction is a way to sustain the capitalist machine, because it destroys markets, it destroys it deals with the overproduction crisis, it monopolizes, it sets the clock back in order to keep the capitalist engine, running in terms of like industries. So these are part of the counter tendencies, and this is obviously another angle behind the war as well in Iran. This is another aspect behind it. But yeah, when it comes to, I guess, discussing what's happening in the region, it's just, and globally, it's just, I've had people message me, even with the situation in Venezuela, asking me, how is Israel connected to it? I mean, Latin America has been colonized and treated as a United States backyard before, Zionism and Israel rather existed. So we really need to start, understanding the economic incentives here. And I don't know if you wanted to mention really quickly as well, like, just even the situation in Lebanon. I mean, it's connected pretty, like,
I
yeah,
have I, I have to do campaign stuff.
yeah.
My window's blocked out. I'm so sorry.
All right,
We're eventually gonna have to do Lebanon.
no
Like,
worries.
we have to. First of all, there's a huge. They're bombing the shit out of it. Israel is, under the cover of the greater war with Iran. They're trying to send in ground units to set up a illegal military occupation. They're taking losses. The blackout coming from Israel and both Lebanon, because like it's that they don't have reliable internet or anything like that. It's really hard to ascertain what's going on the ground, but there is ground warfare happening. Israel wants to again disarm Hezbollah, and that was in the interest of the French. It's in the interest of the United States as well. It's in the interest of the Comprador Lebanese government. I don't think it's going to again, it's not going to happen. uh, Hezbollah has put effective rounds on target with inside Greater Israel. One of the videos that did manage to get out of Israel in some of these IDF Telegram channels was one of their drones hitting a local radar node. It was a massive satellite dish in the north of Israel. So there's stuff happening. But we just don't have time to get to it because I got to go be lame and
Yeah,
it,
do
be
your
part of the
campaign.
electoral. Yeah,
All
yeah.
I was going to say about that is, I was just gonna say just two quick points. People need to be aware about the internal political situation in Lebanon. That's where it's going to play out with the current sort of administration and the Lebanese armed forces. I mean, there's reports coming out that they're trying to take action against Hezbollah. They're really trying to do this whole disarming them. So it's kind of like almost pushing towards. I'm concerned about maybe some sort of civil conflict breaking out. That's something they're going to try and play on. And also, again, quick point: the GCC states. Nobody is, financially trying to, like, or rather using economic duress against the Lebanese state as much as the IMF, the World Bank, and the GCC states establish their exclusive economic corridor in the south. So again, going back to the GCC state, so just be aware of those two things, and obviously, yeah, we can discuss this another time.
Yep. Jesus, so much. Guys, don't feel too overwhelmed, all right? You guys are smart and you guys are great, and the human brain was not meant to process this much insane, depressing information at once consistently. So,
Yeah.
you are allowed to put down your phone or your news app or your podcast and actually just exist as a normal human. And Alina and I will continue to monitor the situation and troll Pete Hegseth so you don't have to. So, anyways, guys.
Now you've inspired me to try to use my X account more.
Oh yeah. Or you can, he posts on Instagram too. So don't sleep on it.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Don't sleep on rage
I did
baiting on
not know.
Instagram. Yeah.
I had no clue. Oh, that's a whole. See, now you've given me something to do. Like among like the research, that's just like okay. Also trolling Pete Hegseth on Instagram.
Yeah. So
let's go.
Three accounts you need to follow: Department of War, Pete Hegseth, and the White House account. The White House account has been sending out the most lame wartime propaganda, and you can also rage bait excellently in those comment sections. So they'll get triggered. They'll go to your profile page. I get you're not a vet. I get you're not a veteran, but they'll see like Marxist Leninist in yours and just absolutely melt down. So, and they can't get you.
Oh yeah,
you're all the way on the other side of the world, and they don't have passports. So, anyways, y'all,
they probably won't even know where I am. Like, what is a Cyprus?
Yeah, it's in Africa, which is a country. So, so. All right, y'all.
Yeah.
Hope that was a good roundup for what's going on. And it was kind of hectic because there's just a lot to do and there's not enough time to structure things. But you guys are great. Thank you so much. And we will see you. Well, I'll see you Friday for our Patreon episode. But we'll see you next week. Cheers, y'all. Bye.